Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings for the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Garenza. In part 2 of our exploration of the ages, we shift from cosmic timescales to the intimate reality of personal and collective transformation. So in this episode, we examine the difference between surface-level changes and the kind of deep metamorphosis that actually shifts consciousness. We also explore why so many attempts at change, whether personal, organizational, or even cultural, fail to create lasting transformation. This is something we've all seen. And we delve into what it really takes to move through these periods of uncertainty and disillusion, very much what we're going through right now. So for anyone navigating major life transitions or sensing that humanity itself is in a period of profound change, this conversation offers both practical wisdom and encouragement for the journey ahead. And we hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. And now back to the podcast in part 2 of the ages. In the previous episode, we dealt with kind of the 30,000-foot view of these ages. And these ages are huge in terms of, human years. It's almost incomprehensible. But right before the show, you shared with me a quote for as we kind of move from the macro to the micro, maybe. This Lao Tzu quote, which is, it just blew me away. I hadn't heard this one before, but it's like it perfectly predicts and accurately describes the state that we're in as a global culture at this moment. So I was maybe we just go right into that.
Well, yeah, because let's just say this is part 2. As you said, last time, part 1, I guess we're calling this something like the ages and the passages, because every time there is a passing age, you have to go through a passage to get there. So it's all about passages between two things. So you've got process and you've got waves and particles.
Sure, yeah.
So we gave some figures last time. For instance, a year of Brahma. This is a year of God. According to the Vedic tradition, it's 311.04 trillion years. So you can't really wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
So that's where you have to accept infinity is boundless space. Eternity is boundless time, which means time and space is that receptive field in which creation can occur.
Yeah.
So we have to bring this down to the level of our daily lives.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And so we always begin from the universal to the particular. That's the tradition in the lineage we come from. You start with the big picture so you know the context, and then you put a little X on it and say, here am I, here we are. And so where are we? But let's begin with that quote from Lao Tzu, because as you say, it could have been written today. So this is what it says. In earlier times, people lived simply and serenely, sensitive to the fluctuations that constantly occur. They were able to adjust comfortably to the energy of the day. Today, people live hysterical, impulsive lives, ignoring the subtle alterations of yin and yang, which influence all things. They become confused, exhausted, and frustrated. However, even today, one can restore wholeness and clarity to one's mind. The way to do this is through the study of the I Ching. Like the cycle of day and night, everything is a Tai Chi, incorporating movements between yin and yang. If you do not see the patterns in these movements, you are lost. But if you consult the I Ching with an open mind, you will begin to see the patterns underlying all things. Knowing that daybreak will come, you can rest peacefully at night. When you accurately perceive the fluidity of things, you also begin to perceive the constancy behind them, the creative, transformative, boundless, immutable Tao. To see this is the ultimate education and the ultimate solace. But what does that evoke in you, Joey?
Whew. I mean, that's the encapsulation of our entire state of affairs right now. I mean, for me, it's so personal for me because I feel like I've gone through that whole transition, and I am personally trying to embody that, trying to embody the idea of seeing the patterns, understanding, that the sun also rises, and really also it's like a period of letting go but not forgetting. So not forgetting that the sun's going to rise, but also letting go of my attachment to whether it does or not.
I guess the difficulty that arises is when I am disconnected, when we as a society are disconnected. And the disconnect, we could say on a spiritual level, is always between the personality and the soul. Most people don't realize inside of themselves is this beautiful font of wisdom, this light-filled level of consciousness that still hasn't been contacted and has not yet been allowed to flow into the daily life. Or you could simply say, we live in cities where there is a lot of street lighting. You don't see the stars. You're not aware of the stars. A lot of cities, you don't often see a tree.
Yeah.
So we're disconnected from the natural signs and rhythms and the rhythms of the seasons. Yeah. And this is why when I left Stockholm back in the early 70s, and a group of us went to learn organic farming from this old farmer in the west of Sweden who had been practicing a particular form of horticulture that had been handed down for 600 years in that valley from some Finnish immigrants. He basically said to us, take off your shoes and socks and go walk barefoot on the soil. You've lost contact with the earth. You've been walking on concrete for too long.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, wow. And then at night, you could see the stars. There was no light pollution.
Yeah.
And then when those times of the year when the northern lights came, the northern lights were there.
Yeah.
And suddenly the awe and wonder of what we're a part of. But if I'm disconnected from awe and childlike wonder, things get overly serious or overly sterile or overly harsh because my heart is not open. I'm not connected to the natural rhythms of the planet, of which I am, and you are, and we all are, aspects. This is the being in whom we live and move and have our being. So the first thing for me, if I'm going to understand what does it mean to move from one thing to another through a passageway, I have to be in touch with the life that animates where I'm living, which is the planet Earth, and understand that. So it's reconnecting and reestablishing a living relationship, which is why watching the sunrise and watching the sunset is such an important part of many cultures. Even though we know the sun never rises and never sets, it's the Earth turning. So we see the sun in its different location from the Earth's perspective.
Right.
However, the symbolic, it's the changing from night to day, from day to night. And as the days go, so the years go. As the years go, the incarnations go. But all of this flow of incarnational time is simply the process that allows us to unfold that which lives at the heart of our being. And so often, change is more of an outer rearrangement of furniture. It's not a major interior design based on the sacred geometry that lives at the heart of who we are. So that's another way of looking at it. So there are many ways to be connected, but unless I understand that I'm part of something greater, then the change seems to be, I'm being forced to do this, somebody's forcing me. But life calls to us to enter into greater states of wholeness and integration. Therefore, change is an invitation to what's next. But it depends. There are some people whose invitations are somewhat nefarious, and they could invite you into, a sticky web.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of sticky web out there. You got to keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Frodo and the Lord of the Rings.
That's right.
And Shelob when he got caught up in that giant spider's web. We get caught up in a giant spider's web here of our own illusions and our own addictions and our own patterns, which is liberation. So liberation really is this moving, this changing from one state to another.
Yeah.
So what door would you like to open?
Well, I just wanted to just for a second touch on this. When you were talking about the interior and the exterior, I mean, to think about, especially when you think of like an interior designer, and, like if the facade doesn't match the interior, or if it does, there's no, the word design is key there. It's how are you, how are you holding the entire space? And so much of what we seem concerned with now is the exterior and the facade, and we're letting like the interior go to dust and.
Well, because then we're not being true to ourselves. We're not being authentic.
Right.
We're actually painting the outside to look to fit in with what society believes is the correct image of our world.
Yeah, and we were talking briefly about this before we started this podcast. As we're increasingly in a virtual world, you're coming from a Zoom meeting, you got other Zoom meetings, you have a lot of Zoom meetings, and we work remotely a lot of times. But I think the importance of 2025 is, whenever possible, to put yourself in the same room with another human.
Right. For the past 4 years, I've been part of co-hosting online conferences from the Community of Living Ethics in Italy, which is like a sister community to Meditation Mount, and it's worked really well. And there's something about getting back into time, space, and substance together by being in the same space. So we are going to gather 2025 and have a 4-day conference. I know it means people flying, and you can say, oh gosh, then it's pollution. Leaving that aside for a moment, and we'll find a way of offsetting that. But leaving that aside, what you just said, it's that when we actually experience in the flesh, in our blood and our bones, another person, we do that online. But when I first meet a person, give them a hug, shake their hand, we've got physical contact. There is a magnetic exchange on a physical level. And once I've done that, I'm locked in. I've got that relationship. And then next time I meet with them online, that's still there, that memory, that cellular memory of that person's true identity, their true note.
Right.
And so go back to the interior design. When you think of every time you sound a particular frequency, it creates different patterns in a sand tray.
That's right.
Which basically said God is a geometrician.
Yeah.
Going back to Pythagoras.
Sure.
That the whole divine geometry is the structure, the outworking, the outpicturing of the inner reality. And that's why the temples and mosques and all the sacred buildings around the world call to us. They are beautiful. They also cause us to aspire. That's why a lot of the churches had spires on them. They were aspirational. They pointed to the heavens. What we don't have now is inspirational and aspirational forms. Strip malls are basically squares, boxes. We go to the big boxes to buy our our large-sized things and that, which I'm not knocking it. However, what we see the geometry of functionality, of outer comfort. We don't see the geometry on the outside that reflects the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of each person. And each one of us is different. So each one of our lives will be nuanced differently, will show up differently. But when everyone is cookie cutter, it's like Stepford Wives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, I think that interesting how the ebb and the flow of a civilization works. I look at a lot of times, a lot of the architecture in America, a lot of the manufactured homes, a lot of the subdivision, and they, to me, they look like kind of sort of glorified tents, like, you know, and they're not going to be here in 200 years. So it's like this first draft before we can kind of come in with, you know, more permanent buildings. And, you know, just it's this attachment to form, but again, and the ages. So we're moving from these ages from one to the next. And I think it's interesting that now that we have this incredible technology that we can interface with someone anywhere, the technology of being able to be in the same room with each other is also like on this parallel track of evolution. Like, you know, in human history, it was never possible to just jump on a plane and fly across the world and give somebody a handshake. You know, so
and yet you can do now this. You can put on your virtual goggles,
yes,
and you can be in a room together.
Yeah.
However, at certain level of consciousness, you can touch another person just
That's
as
true.
you would shake their
Sure.
hand in the physical. At the moment, for me, the physical handshake and the hug and the interaction is an anchoring and a grounding of our relationship. However, those enlightened beings, they can touch each other beyond time, space, and substance.
Yeah, we have that quantum entanglement. So we're, you know, you're never really actually away from anyone. And I think in some ways, in the way that like social media is sort of training wheels for telepathy, this being able to be around people from other parts of the world is also a kind of training wheels. You know,
it's a quick infusion of a global society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before, when I grew up, I just got input from my local area, my local culture, the local whatever.
Yeah.
It was like a monoculture. Now we're exposed to all these streams from around the world. Some of these streams are pure and bubbly, and others are polluted. So we've got a mixture of different waters flowing through our human psyche.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dilution, there's a flattening at times, but then there's also new niches where things bubble up and become interesting again.
But just to go back to what you said about the interior design, I remember when I was working in corporate America, we had this phenomenon that we, because what I did, I was a senior organization development consultant working with large-scale systems change. So we do these large-scale system change on production systems for airplanes, and you're involving thousands of people, and the chief engineer or the vice president of a particular airplane project would say, "I want this change. I want this. I want it to, do this."
Yeah.
And they would make the changes. And then about a year later, they go, "Well, it doesn't feel any different." And I would then point out there's a big difference between what I call cosmetic change, which is when you paint something, when you polish something on the outside and call it change. The real change, we're going back to whatever note you sound creates a new geometry. The same thought form, the same thinking, the same behaviors were still at the center of the operating system. And therefore, if you create a new form, it will revert back to the shape that is determined by the note that sounded at the center. So in order to have true change, you've got to change the frequency of that note. You've got to change your behavior, change the way you see each other, upgrade your relationships. I mean, it could be through simple steps of how to work as a team and take it out of punitive management styles where people are absolutely afraid to speak up. Even if they see that we're crashing, nobody wants to say, "Excuse me, we're crashing," because you'll be punished. But if you don't speak up, you'll be dead.
Yeah.
I attended, because this is part of an aerospace company, I attended a lot of workshops on, let's say, what happens in the cabin and in the cockpit in different cultures. And there was a time a while back where if you were a female flight attendant and you saw something wrong, you could not tell the male pilot that something was wrong.
Yeah. Wow.
And when we're talking 30, 40 years ago,
Sure.
some crashes were put down to non-communication of important data. That which blocked the data was a taboo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty heavy one. I mean, it's been around for a while.
Crew resource management. Mm-hmm. And this is, so it's how do you have a constant flow of the vital fluids around a system?
Right.
Rather than saying, no, you can't say that, you can only say this. Because unless you have truth, unless you have authentic data, non-corrupted data, and if you're managing by data and you've got corrupted data, guess what? You're not going to get the right answer. So that was a really interesting example of seeing an organization go through a change. They would announce these changes with a new organizational chart, which would look different. It looks as though they're all matrixed and all joined in a network. But that was on the outer. On the inner, there was still one person calling the shots in a very heavy-handed way. Not always, but... And if that was the case, then this wonderful new design on the outside would slowly revert back to its true nature. Its true nature is determined by the note that sounded on the inside. So let's take that down from the factory to each one of us.
Yeah, exactly.
If I want to change something in my life, I can't just go out and say, I'm going to go out and buy new clothes. I'm going to go out and buy a new car. That's an outer expression. True change happens when I, from a spiritual perspective, get more in touch with the note of my soul, my own signature tune, and I allow that to shape my life. That to call forth the new colors, the new clothing. So the interior design, it really is the inner note helps clothe me, helps create the nature of the substance that I'm using on earth. So the outside resembles the inside. And we said that really is the hallmark of integrity. When what shows up on my outside vibrates at the same frequency as that inner note. Now, that's an ideal, and we're working towards that. But I know there's a lot of frustration with people who, I try to give up smoke. I give up smoking every day, that kind of thing. Or, this is my last drink, or if only I had a new car. I just need a new girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, that would change everything. No, what changes everything is a deeper relationship with our own essential nature. As far as I'm concerned, that is the starting point for an individual, an organization, a species.
Yeah. Oof. I mean, that's I have one of my notes is to talk about organizational evolution, and you just nailed it. So that was fantastic. And yeah, I mean, we that's interesting because I even have down here what does feminine leadership actually look like in practice? And it's interesting how you brought that up. So
well, it's because feminine leadership, and this is where, once again, I'm going back to how corporate America was in the last 20, 30 years, is that in order for women to advance, they had to sort of wear suits. And you saw them, they would wear the equivalent of a male suit, and sometimes a tie. And they would come across as brusque in order to be heard.
Yeah.
But the true gift of the feminine couldn't be received by the masculine-dominated culture. What we're reaching now is a point where the true gift of the feminine, which is fiery and strong, but it nourishes the field in a way that the masculine doesn't, and the masculine nourishes the field in a way that the feminine doesn't. So you need both aspects.
Yeah.
In leadership, you need the marriage of the inner masculine and feminine inside each one of us. So a true leader is a marriage. Now, I'm not talking about externally, whether we're heterosexual or gay or whatever. That's an outer form. On the inner, because our particular spiritual lineage says that inside of each one of us, the soul is like a magnet, and it's a reflection of the cosmic magnet that has this plus and minus, this 1 and 0, this masculine, feminine aspect, because that's how the one reveals itself through the creative act. So for me, feminine leadership, and sometimes when things are out of kilter, you've got to do a sort of a hard shift to get them back to center. So we do need to stop. We do need to be receptive. We do need to allow the new to enter and not cut it off at the pass, because we already did predetermine what the future should look like.
Mm-hmm.
Here at Meditation Mount, we've determined what the future looks like based on principles.
Yeah.
So this new future society we're seeking to build is based on the principle of essential divinity. Well, as we've said many times, we recognize that each person carries a spark of the Creator inside them. We're part of this one universe, and we are fractals of that. And then the other principle around which we are creating a new society is that of goodwill, which is this constant flow of love, of caring, of sharing, and to really get in touch with the natural urge of the soul, which is to love and give. And then the principle of unanimity that says we're all part of one interdependent, interwoven whole. Mm-hmm. And so we're here to change, but we're not trying to change it to the outside. Mm. By getting everybody to be uniform.
Right. Yeah.
Like we all wear the same clothing, we all have to have the same beliefs, we all have to... Mm-hmm. The beautiful thing about diversity, it is e pluribus unum again.
Right.
It's out of the many one.
Yeah.
Or out of the one many. And then the return back to the one.
Yeah.
So for me, true change happens when each of us say, I choose to be myself as a contribution, not as a way of standing up on the top of the hill and saying, look at me, I captured the flag, I'm in charge now.
Yeah. It is like almost an invitation to be the individualized part of this bigger system. So, it's like inviting the radiator to be the radiator, inviting the fan belt to be the fan belt, and realizing that one is not better than the other, but we're a concert together,
Well, because we're all part of the same vehicle.
Yeah.
And the vehicle is the body of the Creator. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. And no one part is more important than the other.
Yeah.
However, I will say that a very important part that can't be left out of any equation, particularly going forward, is the heart. And I know that we're going to do a podcast on the heart now because it's so central. Mm-hmm.
And that's also, that ties into the era that we're moving into, though. So,
yes.
So if we're moving back into this concept of transitioning, and it's in the same way that you use that metaphor of like a female flight attendant not being able to talk to the pilot, there are some growing pains and growing or transitional elements that we need to get used to. And we see that playing out, whether it's your local organization, whether it's your place you work, or even, just the way you work within a family. I put it back to the evolution of empathy. I just I started watching the series Rome again, and just anytime I revisit the Holy Roman Empire or the Roman Empire, specifically like around the BC AD changeover, it's just the absolute disregard for life. Just you just didn't matter. Like the wholesale. Just there was just no empathy.
Well, even in the Roman army,
yeah.
What do you think the word decimated comes from?
Oh.
In order if somebody made a mistake, in order to punish, they would take every 10th soldier and kill them.
Yeah.
A decimation.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. Let this be an example to you. Well, what is the example we're setting now?
Yeah.
The invitation now is to come on out and play. Bring your better angels out to play. Mm-hmm. Open your heart, because inside your heart is your authentic self. Not this self that's been AI generated, and self-image. And I've noticed I've gone through these tough times, and you have, and there's a friend of mine who's going through a particularly tough time where they have a certain self-image, and that self-image, they're going to preserve that at all costs. But there is a big gap between their self-image and how they're currently behaving and their level of consciousness. Something's got to break at some point.
Yeah.
Now, you can actually break it by surrendering, letting go, disidentifying, or you can wait till life shatters you, shatters your illusion
That's right.
of who you are
Yeah.
in order so you can get in touch with the truth of who you are. That's what change is about. And in the spiritual teachings, it says that true change and transformation is the shift of consciousness from one state to a greater state through the agency of fire.
Yeah. Can we explore that a little bit more? Yeah, just like what does that mean, the agency of fire, and what does that process look like? Because that's important. I feel like I can identify with that one.
Well, let me choose my words carefully here, because otherwise it sounds like I'm preaching fire and brimstone.
No, right.
As we know in the ancient scriptures, particularly in the Bible, is our God is an all-consuming fire. There is only fire. Everything is a densification of fire. We've mentioned in these podcasts before that there are the three types of fires that are described in our lineage. That's the electric fire, which is the fire of the monad. That's the highest vibrating fire, the essential fire. Then there's the solar fire, the fire of the soul. And then there is the fire by friction, which is the fire that lives inside of matter. Mm-hmm. So what we often do when we live our lives, we get fired up by rubbing against something. We generate a lot of fire by friction in our daily lives.
That's true.
And we get irritated. It creates heat, but it doesn't always create light, wisdom.
Right. That's
so
for sure.
The difference is solar fire comes from the soul.
Okay.
And then once the solar fire is in place, as we said before, the solar fire then in some wonderful way becomes the fiery fireplace in which the higher fire can then merge and blend. So when we go through change, it's an invitation to step into a deeper realization of who we are. I'm not being asked to be someone else. Somebody may have an idea of what I should be.
Yeah.
That's their issue. I know that true change for me is a surrender to my current understanding of who I am so that I can express a deeper dimension of who I am, which is this whole process we talked about before that Dr. Assagioli gave us through his psychosynthesis, his spiritual psychology of disidentification. You disidentify with what you currently hold to be true, let that go, and then you identify with something deeper, broader, more meaningful, more significant to you. And then that becomes your new point of orientation and identity, which in itself is only a partial identity in the greater scheme of things. So don't get carried away thinking you reached it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that for me is a fiery act. And fire is associated with will. And so every time I say, I choose, I dare, we're invoking a higher fire. And sometimes when I say, I choose this path, I dare, I will, fire says, okay, well, when I look at you, the forms you've got at the moment don't make the grade. I'll tell you what, let's put them through the fire.
Yeah.
And then we'll create something new. How do the samurais temper their swords?
Yeah, fire.
Fire and water.
That's right.
You heat it up, you put it in water.
Yeah.
And we do the same things. We temper our personalities so that they, and the sword, of course, is really the sword of truth. And the truth that it wields is the secret of love, is the power of love. So really, the fiery spiritual warrior is seeking to liberate life from all that is not love, the self from the not self. Mm-hmm. So fire destroys everything except itself. Mm. 7 years ago, last weekend, we were immersed and engulfed in the Thomas fire. It burnt to the ground one of our residences. It took out a lot of our vegetation. It singed the buildings. We were fortunate that we still have buildings here. But what it did it stopped us in our tracks. We had to show up differently from then on. So we said, let's take this as an opportunity. What does it mean to be the phoenix rising from the ashes? It's not to rebuild the mount as it was, not to carry on the same way as we've been interacting with each other and life. This is an opportunity to upgrade, which is what we did. And it was a slow process of reaching this new turn of the spiral. And it wasn't just about replanting the gardens and repairing this. It was standing in a different place as a group. And at a deeper level of responsibility to life and to being stewards of this place. And out of that, we created a new magnet, and that new magnet attracted new elements to it. And over the years, we've gone through this 7-year cycle, and where the mount is now compared to 7 years ago during the fire, it's evolved. It's changed. And moving forward, we want to make sure we're not invoking another wildfire here.
That's right.
But we will keep the flame alive inside so that everything is renewed from the fire.
Yeah. I think there's an important element there in the willingness. It's you get this invitation. It was in the form of a fire, but it was also an invitation to try something new, to change, and you have to take that. Like you can be forced to confront something, but you have to still walk through that fire. And I think for me that was what happened with me. It was like the universe kept giving me opportunities to change, and it took me being absolutely shooken up before I decided to take that leap. But it was the conscious decision. And it was a very conscious decision to make a change.
Well, that's why we're talking about transition and passages between two states.
Yeah.
That's why the passage that you just went through and I'm describing for the mount, it's crossing the burning ground. That's what it's called spiritually, crossing the burning ground.
Right. Yeah.
Because you've got to go through the fire. But the fire, at its very heart, its very essence, is the fire of love.
Yeah, because it's ultimately everything is there is to teach you these lessons, and it's ultimately held in a container, a hearth of love. Yeah, which is sometimes hard to see. Sometimes it's tough love. It
is. But that I go back to everything when it evolves, moves from one state to another.
That's right.
But it does this through a passage, through a transition.
Yeah.
So I worked a lot with this whole thing of how to manage transitions in organizations and also helping people. I did a lot of counseling of helping people at particular times in their lives. And I would only take clients whose life was falling apart because they said yes to life.
That's
I had a lot of skilled colleagues who, if somebody wanted to be, reach a higher point, a pinnacle on their career, the people that could coach them. I felt drawn to the people whose lives were falling apart. They go, my God, I thought I just made a soul choice, and look at the mess I'm in now. Letting them know that you're going through a conscious dissolution and disintegration of your own forms. Now, do you want to be part of the reemergence? What does the reemergence of who you are look like, and how do you assist it once you've said yes to it? So saying yes to something also calls in those aspects that are going to destroy the parts that aren't to be carried forward. And so this was a major thing. And so I worked with a consultant, and he's written a number of books. William Bridges, he wrote books 20, 30 years ago on managing transitions. He wrote the book on transitions. It's very simple. There are a lot of questions and a lot of things you can do at different stages. But basically, what you're looking at is embracing the future as an unknown change. How do I go from here to there, where there is unknown and here is known, but here is not as healthy as what can be? So he gave this image. Imagine casting off in a boat from a land, you say, I choose to leave this land, and I choose to go and find the new land.
Mm-hmm.
And as you move out from the coastline and it recedes in the distance, there comes a point where you are in the middle of the ocean. You cannot see the land you left. You cannot see the land you're going to.
Mm-hmm.
He calls it the neutral zone. It's the unknown space. It's this space where you've got no reference point.
Yeah.
You are navigating by faith.
Yeah. And that's the scary part of any, to make it personal, that's the scary part of any personal change.
But if you say yes and I choose,
Yep.
that's already set in motion your coordinates.
That's true.
So faith is believing in the coordinates that your soul is navigating to.
Yeah.
And then when you reach the new land, you step onto new land. And you have to leave behind your old clothing, your old thought forms. You're being asked to stand naked and reclothe yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this example before, Joey, from the Bible. The Old Testament is what Moses was tasked with leading the Israelites out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But and then his next task, which isn't really referred to, is leading Egypt out from inside the Israelites, because when you're inside a culture and you are impregnated with it, you're imprinted with it, you're conditioned by it.
Yeah.
So in order for them to reach the promised land, it wasn't just geographically moving. The promised land really is a new state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to remove the old thought forms, the old beliefs, the old behaviors to allow space for the new temple to be built.
Yeah. In recovery, there's an idea that, a geographic change doesn't solve your problems, so you just take them with you.
Well, and the other thing with working with groups, which I always emphasize, is because there's usually somebody in a group that everyone can say, God, if that person wasn't in this group, life would be much easier.
Yeah.
I said, look, if you remove a person, you don't remove the pattern from the field.
Mm-hmm.
And central casting will say, oh, they're missing a player. And they will send along somebody to fill that vacant position, probably somebody who's a better actor. And so, because this is what we're doing. So you have to deal with the transformation. And as we said before, transformation is the shift in consciousness and beingness from one level to a new and greater level through the agency of fire.
Right.
Water washes and purifies. Fire transforms and transfigures.
And that's what we're in right now.
And because we're at the end of Kali Yuga, and we touched on that in the first part, the previous podcast, the movement from Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga. And Satya Yuga is the beginning of this new opportunity to reveal the truth of who we are, and it has more of a feminine flavor to it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's going to be a matriarchy and all the men are going to be punished, although some of that may happen in the beginning.
But there may be a reckoning.
There may be a reckoning. But it simply says that in order to live at a deeper and higher and more fulfilled state, and to have a more just and joyful society, we have to expand our consciousness. And in order to do that, we need to clear the field. The first act of creation is the clearing away of a field. Just as in gardening, you would create the soil conditions. You would create a soil that could receive the new seeds. So the seeds that we want to sow, the new seeds, have to have new soil conditions in which to grow, which is why we focus on the three principles of essential divinity, goodwill, and unanimity, because we believe that this is the bedrock upon which to build the temple, or the true psychic soil conditions in which the seed of spirit can quicken and flower on earth as the revelation of our true humanity. Now that, once again, is a very lofty, grandiose statement, but it simply means each day we're our own soul gardeners.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to us to garden. We're responsible for the state of the seed, we're responsible for the state of the soil, and we're responsible for stewarding the life that is born out of the marriage of seed and soil, of masculine and feminine.
And that's a big change from a perspective change from how we look at this.
Well, because it means that we need to have both the masculine and feminine in a dynamically balanced state of equilibrium inside ourselves.
Right, and that's I mean, what does that look like from it? Like how do we? I mean, how do we incorporate that? And or we seem to be sort of doing it, but we seem to also be kind of struggling with it. You know, I mean, like it's.
Oh God, I don't think I can really put what I sense into words, Joey. The clearest would be, it isn't like, no, I'm identifying with my feminine, no, I'm identifying with my masculine. It's when these two aspects come alive, those times when I need to be silent and receptive and holding a field, I call upon that feminine aspect of myself. And maybe at the same time, something needs to be initiated and I plant a seed inside that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean I'm sort of oscillating between these two poles. It's like I'm bringing them in. They flow and they dance together. It's the dance of creation.
Yeah.
So what does the dance of creation look like? What's the choreography that will help Michael to give birth to what I've got to give and what you've got to give?
Yeah. I mean, I really like that idea of both planting a seed and holding space, you know, being patient, being receptive, you know, not imposing, you know, but at the same time, planting the seed. So, I mean, I can use only the example of my own life, really. And I see how, like, okay, so I made this life change, and then they had to be patient because it was, this is a seed that took a long time to blossom.
Well, and we've used this terminology before, being patient, and patient isn't sitting there waiting for something to happen, like drumming your fingers and saying, I'm waiting, I'm patient, I can wait here as long as it takes. No, patience is the ability to hold a clear intent lovingly over time without irritation and attachment to outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So you're holding the tension in the field, and the tension in the field is the creative tension between the masculine and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
The feminine represents, if you like, patience. And when this patience then is this fertile field, and the masculine seed is that which impregnates the fertile field, and then something is born. I have to have both the ability to seed and to be the fertile field.
Yeah, like embodying both those is that's a totally new concept.
Which is why I'm saying we have to learn to be soul gardeners.
Right.
Well, that's huge, because that's what's facing each one of us. If I'm not satisfied with my life, I want to change it. I want it to be different. Mm-hmm. But how do I go about making it different? Do I move? Do I get a new partner? Do I get a new job? Do I go out and buy a new car? We said that before. Yeah. Or do I say, I surrender to my current expression, who I believe I am, and I dare to invoke the truth of who I am to show up and reveal the next iteration of who I am based on my new level of awareness. And this is a continuous process. As we said many times on this podcast, evolution is a progressive entry into greater states of wholeness, identity, and embodiment in time, space, and substance.
Yeah. This is an invitation. I really appreciate this exploration, because I mean, it can be kind of deep and get into the weeds a little bit in the minutia of the esoteric terminology. But man, this is the everyday. This is what we're really going through. For those who have had to make a big change in their life or did make a big change in their life, this is, this is sort of like tacks onto that, sort of like an esoteric description of what's happening. I know, because for me, I went through it, and all these things were happening, and then I like that idea of when you're being patient, you're not just waiting. And in our constant, always on 24/7 culture, patience is something that I could not have made these changes in my life without that. Because things did not happen quickly.
Well, if you think of patience being expectant.
Okay.
Like when a woman is carrying a child, they're expectant. They're expecting a child.
Yeah.
So patience is a field of expectancy.
Okay.
So you're holding it as expectant. Now, you don't know the timing of it. You do with a child, it's 9 months.
Right.
But some of these seed ideas have different gestation periods.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine what you've just described on a personal level happening to us as one humanity at the moment. We're at this major point of change where, in order to do real change, not cosmetic change, but true change, we've got to be in touch with the truth of who we are, the soul of our humanity, because otherwise we're going to rearrange it according to our conditioning, our biases, our beliefs, and we're going to get another version of what we got now.
Right, because we see that in every field, whether it's politics or whether it's culture, entertainment, we're always looking for the external change rather than the internal change. Right,
and as we know, that the extreme left, extreme right start to actually look the same.
Yeah.
And we've said this before, don't get caught up in the pendulum swing. Stand at that still point from which the pendulum hangs, and then go through and live the arc that's described in space of this swing between the two, because that's the creative, that's the dynamo. That is the dynamo.
Yeah.
This oscillation between positive and negative creates the electricity. But don't get electrocuted.
Yeah.
The still point is that deep place of peace and love inside the heart that can hold all the differences, that can hold the duality. And we've mentioned in a podcast we did on the current state of the world is that how do you break the current deadlock of duality and find a higher point of convergence? How do we truly, on an individual and a national and a global level, create a more perfect union of who we are?
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, we could talk about the butterflies. It goes from the caterpillar to the green soup of the chrysalis, and then emerges as the butterfly. And then, as we know, that even in the caterpillar stage, the dream of the butterfly lived as imaginal cells inside the DNA of the caterpillar. It was always there. Yeah. Inside of us is the DNA of our perfected being, is the promise, is the imaginal cell of our divine self. And we've got to go through the green soup stage. I think humanity at the moment is about to enter the green soup stage. Yeah. And a lot of people don't know there's a butterfly waiting at the other end.
That's the important part to remember. There really is. That's the leap of faith. But I feel like, I feel like we're all going through this green soup together. Yeah.
Well, so Earth becomes a big soup kitchen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, God. I mean, there's so much more we could say, but I think we've covered the main things. What I would love people who are listening to this podcast to reflect on is like, what am I being called to do in my life? What's the invitation that I can feel from inside me, deep inside me? Mm-hmm. And what's the current gap between the ideal that I feel I'm being called to and my current state, and not to be distraught and get into sense of depression and despair because the gap looks too big. the gap can be bridged. It's first of all, the first act of bridging the gap is saying, I choose to bridge it. I choose to be who I am, and I'm willing to go through the process of dying and being reborn. The caterpillar doesn't say, hey, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go and find a pair of wings and glue them on my back, and I'm going to walk around town and say, hey, I'm a butterfly. No, caterpillar, you got to dissolve.
Wow, yeah. That's the ultimate leap of faith right there.
So is our society caterpillars parading around with wings glued on their back? I'm being facetious.
I know, but I think we are. I think we are. I think that's where we are right now. We're trying to fake it till you make it without having the courage to make that leap.
So it's green soup. Come on in. It's lovely. The water's lovely.
That's right.
The green soup is warm.
That's right.
But that's what it takes to go through the burning ground, the fire. It's a fiery act, an initiation, which is the entry into a greater capacity to carry out the will of the soul, the will of the Creator, is a liberation from a previous state and an entering in to a new and greater state. So are we willing to liberate ourselves from our current conditioning? And the way to do that isn't by just getting rid of all your things, because if you get rid of all your things, you may be holding on to the same thought form. It's a good start, but am I willing to let go of what I hold to be true about myself and others and consider that there is a new understanding waiting to be born when I let go of what I'm fiercely holding on to? We know if you're listening to this podcast, clench your fists. And inside your fist is your dearly held beliefs. Now, with a clenched fist, you cannot do either a giving or a receiving. When you open your clenched fist, you're able to give and receive with open hands and open heart. So it's how do we unclench ourselves? How do we open the heart? And the heart is a very safe fireplace. So when we invoke the fires of change, standing inside the heart is the safest place. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through some painful processes because, as we said before, pain is the signal that tells you the gap between the ideal and current reality. It's not a punishment. It's just a signal. And so we're going through a painful process of dissolution and resolution, resolution as a human species. And when you don't know the process you're going through, you make up stories. So Armageddon is real. Apocalypse is real, but apocalypse, as we've said, when you go back to the true meaning of the Greek, it's revelation. So the apocalypse is a breaking away and a breaking apart of the old forms so that a new can be revealed. Are you and I willing to be broken apart so that the new can be revealed from within? That is the true interior design skill that the soul has. I can design a new being. Allow me to be the designer. And the way that you let me in is you open your heart and you say yes. I mean, that for me is the beginning of all change. Conscious change.
Whew. Wow, that was beautiful. That's true. That's what it is. There it is. Oh, wow. Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful.
Hey, man, got any change?
Yes, we do. All right.
Thank you, Joey.
Okay, cool. We'll see you for the next episode. I think we're going to do the heart.